Politics, of, by, and for the people. A program brought to you by the members of organized labor who work and live in your community.
Hello there. Today we want to discuss with you some bread and butter aspects of politics, the dollars and cents importance of politics to people who work for wages and salaries. Each of you is probably aware that in spite of all the publicity given to politics in our country, barely half of the eligible voters actually cast their ballots, even in presidential elections. Let me try to show you visually what this means. Let's say that this represents the electorate at large, all Americans of voting age. Now take any typical election of the past several decades, be it local, state, or national. Normally, only slightly more than half, if half, of these citizens will actually vote. Well, you may say, if it's more than 50%, we still have government by majority, haven't we? And that's the important thing, isn't it? But wait a second. That slightly more than half of the voters who actually do vote normally divide fairly equally as between Democrats and Republicans. Even in the so-called landslide victory for one party or the other, the difference in the total vote cast for either party is rarely more than 10% and generally not as much as that. In Franklin Roosevelt's most successful year in 1936, he received 60.2% of the total vote cast. In Dwight Eisenhower's victory in 1956, he received 57.4% of the total. Now, in either case, remove the lesser of the two percentages, and what have you got? You've got government by minority, haven't you? Something like 30% of the total of voters has been controlling. Now, I'm stressing this fairly elementary fact of our political system because it may explain a great deal about why government so often seems to serve the interests of a few rather than the interests of all the people. Here's another fact which is related to that one and which makes the point perhaps even more sharply. This chart indicates who generally votes and who doesn't vote based on annual income. And these dry lines represent something crucially important and defective in our democracy. Look at them. Along the bottom, you see their rates of annual income running from 2,000 over here to 1,000,000 over here. This rising line indicates the percentage of people in each income level who actually vote. Now, it's clear that voting participation rises with income. Nearly all people who make $1 million a year exercise their franchise, but nearly 80% of the people who make only $2,000 a year fail to exercise their franchise. So is it any wonder why government tends to be more responsive to the wishes of people in the upper half of the income scale than to the wishes of people in the lower half? Here is where the votes are, up there. Here are constituents. Down here in the main, just people, voiceless people. Voiceless because they don't raise their voices. They don't vote. But you know, this situation doesn't have to continue. And there is an organization which works year-round to change it. That organization is called COPE, the Committee on Political Education. And COPE works through all of the unions of the AFL-CIO to raise the level of political understanding among working people, to increase registration among voters, and to stimulate actual voter participation in elections. Now, COPE isn't tied to either party's political kite. COPE is nonpartisan, COPE is independent, but it does support candidates. Support, however, goes only to candidates who are pledged to work for the enactment of measures which answer the wants and needs of that great majority of our population who work for wages and salaries. The work of COPE is financed by voluntary $1 contributions from the members of America's labor unions. Contributions, of course, from the friends of working people are also welcome because COPE's job is always far bigger than COPE's resources. One of the hardest parts of that job is to persuade working people that politics is more than speeches, enthusiasm, meetings, baby kissing, and so on. Politics is money. Politics is meat on the table. Politics is your chance of getting the kids through school. It's the size of your pension, what you get, if anything, when you're sick, injured, unemployed. Most workers, it's obvious, are reasonably interested in and active in and satisfied, by and large, with their unions. Because what a union does is concrete and visible. You can see it in the contract, in wages, in better working conditions, in pensions, in insurance. But a union contract can't reach everywhere, no matter how good it is. And what working people may gain at the bargaining table, and gain often only after years of work and struggle, can be wiped out overnight by a government which feels no obligation to working people. Let me give you just a few concrete examples which you can multiply, we're sure, from your own experience once you get the main point of principle. Most workers today either hold or aspire to hold a mortgage. A typical mortgage runs to 20 years. Now, until fairly recently, the typical interest on a typical mortgage was about 5%. Then along came the hard money policy of the Eisenhower Big Business Administration. Today, interest in general is at least 1% higher. Now, have you got any idea how much money an increase in mortgage interest of just 1% will cost you on a $10,000 mortgage over its life? That 1% increase will take an additional $1,296 out of your pocket. Now, probably you'd be pretty satisfied with your bargaining committee if in the last contract it came out with a wage agreement which gave you, let's say, 6 cents an hour the first year, 12 cents the second, 18 cents the third, and 24 cents an hour the fourth year. If you added all that up, you could look ahead to a net wage improvement over the 4 years of $1,200. Your bargaining committee did a great job for you, didn't it? But look, before you rush out to fix up the basement or get a new car or tell Junior he's halfway to college, remember that mortgage. Remember that 1% increase in interest. Down in Washington, somebody has not done a great job for you, but on you. 4 years of wage increases have been wiped out in that one political stroke, which raised your mortgage interest by just 1%. So next election, if you're as smart as we think you are, next election you will register and vote, won't you? Because it's cost you $1,296 last time not to. It would be, we suppose, most unfair to leave the impression with you that because working people have suffered from the Eisenhower administration's hard money policies of the past several years, all groups in the country have suffered. That isn't true. Bankers, industrialists, and large stockholders have done very well indeed. Hard money was hard. It was very hard on those who had to borrow money, but for the holders of money, life has been beautiful. Over the life of the Eisenhower Big Business Administration, the profits of member banks in the Federal Reserve System have increased by more than 80%. Their cash dividends have increased by about 90%. Hard money is widely blamed among economists as a key cause of the 1957-58 recession and as a likely cause of another recession next year, it's feared. But while the recession threw upwards of 5 million Americans out of work and forced millions of others onto short work weeks and shorter paychecks, the bankers rode out the storm in ermine-lined lifeboats. In the very teeth of the 1957-58 business downswing, bank profits rose by 26%, and cash dividends paid out to bank stockholders increased by 28%. The favoritism shown by this administration to the nation's financial interests is not mere coincidence. We have the word of the late Senator Robert Taft that the great money institutions of this country were united in their support of General Eisenhower for the Republican nomination. And the description of that first Eisenhower cabinet as being made up of 8 bankers and 1 plumber rapidly became anything but a joke. The plumber soon departed, you'll remember, and the country then had its first administration since the time of Ulysses Grant run exclusively of, by, and for big money, big business. Now, without burdening you with a lot of heavy economic argument, it can fairly be said that the net result of governmental favoritism toward great wealth has been to slow down economic expansion overall and to increase the control, the holdings, the influence of a very small percentage of the population over the rest of us. Let's take that second point first. That sliver there represents the nation's top wealth holders, as economists call them, individuals, that is, with $60,000 or more in gross estate. They amount to 1.6% of the total adult population, or about 1 person in 62. And this indicates what this tiny percentage owns of the national wealth, over 30% of the total. There's ample evidence that the amount of the total national wealth coming into the hands of a declining number of individuals has increased sharply in each of the past 7 years. Both history and common sense tell us that this is not a healthy development for a democracy. High concentration of ownership, of wealth, means rigged prices. It means market manipulation. It means neglect of imperative public needs and a slowdown in national economic growth. Now, those admittedly are big and they're complex subjects, and perhaps they don't greatly interest you. But this fact we think should interest you. Mr. Allen Dulles, who's the President's own appointee as director of the Central Intelligence Agency, testified recently that the slowdown in American economic growth, which began back in 1953, has brought us now to an annual expansion of barely 3%, while the rate of growth in the Soviet economy is more than double that. 6% growth per year, he said, is the minimum condition for United States survival. So now will you register and vote? What can be said in 3 minutes to persuade the worker who feels that politics doesn't matter, can't help him, is beyond his personal influence, is a waste of time, to persuade him and his wife that political inaction costs him money every day of the year? Well, here's how the COPE organization of one state of this union is trying, and with only slight variations in the figures, what is true of that state will be true of your state as well. They begin by saying, let's talk dollars and cents. COPE's Legislative Wage Program 1960. We support cutting income taxes by increasing personal exemptions to $800. What's that worth to the average worker? 9 cents an hour. Increase workmen's compensation benefits to $40 a week and $14,400 to survivors at death. Value to the average worker, 4 cents an hour. Cover retail and service workers with $1.25 minimum wage and overtime, 3 cents an hour. Increase unemployment compensation to $40 a week. Value to the average worker, 5 cents an hour. Get prevailing wage rates for public construction. Value to the average worker, 8 cents an hour. In conclusion, they say, give $1 to COPE to help fight for these wage increases in your state capital and in Washington. Now, those simple objectives in that one state are worth 29 cents an hour to the average worker in that state when realized. They can all be achieved because they all make sound public policy, and they amount to very close to $600 per year per worker. $1 per worker invested as a voluntary contribution to COPE can produce $600 per worker if enough of us make that investment. Now, COPE participation costs you $1. What is $1? 3 packs of cigarettes, 5 or 10 cigars, a movie you might be able to kick yourself for having seen, the amount you won or lost on the Giants, the Colts, the Dodgers, or the White Sox. $1 is nothing but a rumpled piece of paper cloth, isn't it? Except for what it does, what it gets you. Political abstention, political inaction, that is what really costs working people money, and it costs those people most who have the least of it. Right this moment, in the middle of what they call the boom, there are about 30 large and 100 smaller labor market areas in this country with substantial labor surplus, which is just another word for unemployment. Remember back when the administration opposed renewal of the temporary unemployment compensation programs? Have you any idea what killing those programs cost the average unemployed worker in this country? $390 per worker. Now, we've barely skimmed the surface of the money importance of political action to people who work for wages and salaries, but we hope that this much at least has been made clear. $1 invested in COPE, the Committee on Political Education, can be the most productive investment you've ever made. In return, you'll receive a receipt, an acknowledgement for your contribution. With your receipt from COPE, you'll receive these publications: Business, Politics, and You, which documents everything said in these programs and more; Labor and Politics, explaining the relationship between politics and collective bargaining; A Positive Program for America, outlining the legislative program of the AFL-CIO; the Farrand Bill, a detailed pamphlet describing the plan for hospitalization insurance for all retirees on Social Security. The place for your $1 again is COPE, care of this station.
Program has been brought to you as a public service by the members of America's labor organizations who work and live in your community.